It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha! It's Feedback Friday, and there's a lot to get to, as usual, this Feedback Friday. Let's dive right in with a comment from Momo Monday. And I am very happy about this comment because I actually made up a new pronoun. Don't freak out, it's just a joke. My God, people, chill out. But I called it a he, they, because as character, I'm assuming this person is a he based on the comments they have left, but I don't know. It could be a woman, so they're a he, they, as opposed to a she, they, someone I assume is female, but I do not know. But they write, you mentioned, and I agree, that we're exceptionally intolerant to mistakes. I think it's connected to a fallacious interpretation of meritocracy. Merit is rightly valued or celebrated, yet a mistake doesn't mean you lack merit and should be discarded. That's where video games as a learning tool are a beautiful thing. Games tolerate mistakes. Even the most unforgivingly hard games at least leave you the option to start from scratch. They teach that if your approach doesn't work, the solution is not always to try harder until you bash your head in. If you fail and fail, even after countless attempts, it doesn't mean you're worthless. Chances are you just need to reconsider your approach. Maybe you've been producing too many warriors for a conflict that you don't necessarily have to fight. Maybe you should try those diplomacy options to get allies or even make peace with your enemies. Go check those advisor screens. Perhaps the reason you're at war is something that's easy to fix if only you listen to what the issue is. And suddenly you don't need that many warriors anymore. Suddenly you can make your economy, culture, and science prosper. And then it's, okay, I'm going to go play some Civilization. Good stuff. I agree. And this has been my issue with this culture of shaming on the internet. People going through and finding the one tweet of doom or something like that. People bringing up stuff from 10 years ago. Sometimes that's relevant, sure, but too often people are not given credit for evolving, for improving. People find that one statement that was made years ago and shows, see, they're bad. We don't get progress that way. And that comment where, try different things. Don't just try harder. Try different things. And that is what I've tried to do here. And I'm glad that some people are getting it, especially commenters like this who are sometimes kind of rough on me. And I'm going to remember this comment going forward, because with a person who doesn't think mistakes are a kiss of death, then okay, I'm going to take their criticisms in a very different light than someone who seems out to destroy. So love the comment. Really cool. I'm glad other people agree with me that we need to be tolerant of mistakes, not because we're being politically correct, but because we recognize that mistakes are a precursor to progress. And that brings me, before we go on, to my question of the week. When I share YouTube comments like this, I take the screen name and icon off it. I do this so that people don't get grief. Is this the right move? Should people be getting credit for things or blame, depending on... I'm trying to avoid public shaming, but I realize I am avoiding public praise as well. Let me know if you like this format. Let's discuss it, because I have the best of intentions, but that doesn't mean it's the best thing to do. Now, segueing from that, oh Lord, the video on the pronoun controversy. Two main arguments in the "no, you're wrong" camp, and both of them are fraught with peril, so I'm going to be very, very careful. A lot of people jumped on me for my comments about Yiddish, and this was perplexing, because the straw man argument that got thrown at me was that I was comparing the entire intersex controversy to Yiddish. No, puppets. No, I was not. I was pointing out that Jordan Peterson's logic, that he should be able to just crap on, because let's face it, he's not just saying this is for me. He's crapping on the entire concept of non-standard English with an ideological origin. And this was what I was pointing out. His comment is too far-reaching. It encompasses too many other things. It is flawed in its generality, because based on that, based on his refusal to accept, not just use himself, but to accept that it's all right for anybody to use language that is not quote unquote proper English and has an ideological background, does mean that Yiddish is not acceptable to him. Let me be clear. I'm not condemning his stating of a preference. I'm condemning the fact that he goes beyond that and makes the entire concept of the fluidity of language into something he seems to think is stupid. And it's one of these arguments that at first is like, yeah, intellectualism. But this insistence on perfectly proper Queen's English is great if you're fortunate enough to be born into a English language speaking household that trains you in that way. And I say that as somebody who grew up in a household where you were scolded for using the wrong bring or take. Bring is transporting an object from there to here. Take is transporting an object from here to there. So you take your kids to school if you are speaking at home. You brought your kids to school if you are speaking at the school. It's contextual and situational. But most people do not use bring and take properly. And they should not be shouted down. They should not be shut down and their entire idea excluded because they didn't use the proper bring or take, because that is classism. That is class warfare. That is an indication that you were brought up in a household of a high enough friggin' caste to bloody well know that. The idea that we should ignore someone's human rights and dignity because it's non-standard English violates what I saw on this week's episode of Bull as the asshole to awesome test. The bigger asshole you are, the more awesome you have to be. And this argument's amount of awesome is just not enough to overcome its amount of asshole. When you're refusing to adapt to something that's right in front of your face because there's no word for it, that is lowbrow stuff. And this is an issue with the English language being limited in some ways. And this is what blows my mind about the whole thing. It comes down to the fact that there is no non-gendered third person singular pronoun in the English language. And not only is English not the only language in the world, it's not the only language in Canada. And French, our other official language, has a non-gendered third person singular pronoun. On, O-N. This is Orwellian thinking. This is double plus ungood. This is an idea that you can control ideas through language. Refusing to acknowledge that there are people out there who do not identify as masculine or feminine does not change the fact that there are people out there who identify as neither masculine nor feminine. And this is just the kind of thing that George Orwell wrote about, not just in 1984, but in his essays, his nonfiction writing. And in those writings, he ties this language police stuff into a really ugly form of nationalism, British nationalism. And so if, this really is a free speech issue, I challenge the people who are defenders of that to take it one step further and make this a free thought issue. Make sure you're not language policing. Make sure you are actually dealing with concepts. And I was trying to not go down the Orwellian road. I was trying to use a softer example because I know this is going to upset a lot of people because they don't think they're engaging in Orwellian thought policing. But guys, when you're trying to control language, which is what refusing to use an accurate word for something is, this isn't 2 + 2 = 5. The desire to force someone to respond to he or she and not another option, even when neither of those things feel true to them, that is 2 + 2 = 5. You have two options, neither of them feel right to you, but we as a society are going to force you to conform to one side of that binary or the other. We don't care if it feels like a lie to you. And this is pivoting into the other thing. I want to pump the brakes on that for a minute. I want to stay on this speech thing because this is a free speech issue. Yes, it is messy right now. Yes, there are a lot of contenders for what this non-gendered third-person singular pronoun is going to be. But this is part of the selection process before something becomes standardized. It is fine to argue that it is too confusing right now, that we need to standardize the language and then insist that people adopt that standardized language. That's fair. Refusing to even try and claiming that's a principled stance is not fine. We can't be lazy. We need to do the work because we learn. We've learned that he and she is no longer enough. And yes, the people it doesn't serve are a minority. But minority rights are a huge part of the foundations of the purpose of free speech principles. You don't get the right to refuse to do something just because it's weird. If this were true, we wouldn't have gay rights. We wouldn't have interracial marriage because both those concepts were seen as just as foreign as this idea of non-gender conforming people or the idea of a third gender. Now, in truth, the idea of the third gender has been around for decades. It just wasn't mainstream. But there is this tendency that has been on the rise for a few years now for otherwise very intelligent people to deny facts, deny science, and instead substitute the actual facts and actual science for pseudoscience of their own making that sounds really good, but doesn't hold up to the slightest bit of examination outside this echo chamber. And it's led to everything from climate change denying to an increase in racism, all this stuff. And I've come up with a term for this phenomenon. I call it Breitwashing. Breitwashing leverages people's natural fear of change to pass off good old bigotry as so-called common sense. And just because someone holds a brightwashed argument or repeats a brightwashed argument, it doesn't mean they're a bigot. It means they've been manipulated. So this argument that you can refuse to use a pronoun other than he or she because it's not proper English is brightwashing. Because at first, it sounds really good. It sounds really intellectual. It sounds like it's speaking to people's higher angels to use their brains. But in truth, it ignores the fact that language evolves. Just because it's not proper English now doesn't mean it's not going to be standardized, acceptable English at some point in the future. Another example of brightwashing is the second major bit of pushback I got from the pronoun thing and my point that intersex people exist, and therefore even if you take away the whole idea of gender as a social construct and if you just stick to the biology, there is evidence that he and she alone are not enough. The second bit of pushback was this idea that intersex people are a genetic mistake and therefore can be ignored or not accommodated. This is classic brightwashing because off the top, it seems like, a bit of tough medicine, just stating plainly the realities that political correctness does not want us to consider. But if you sit and really follow that logic, really think about what that means, you see the foolishness inherent in it. If, as these brightwashers claim, intersex people are a genetic mistake, that means they are subject to birth defects. This means they are disabled people. And this means they are guaranteed accommodation under the Disabilities Act. The only exceptions that business and property owners can get out of, the ADA or the Canadian equivalent is if there is a financial burden that is excessive. That's why there's a delay in ramps. That's why there's a delay in accessibility elevators. I know a business owner who lives on the second floor of the building, not lives, but works on a second floor of a building. They're tied up in permits. So there are practical reasons to be able to get an exemption temporarily. However, there is no cost in calling people by a new pronoun, and there is precedent for this. There have been ever adapting appropriate terms to what you can call a person with a particular disability. And remember when the word retard was acceptable, mentally retarded? Well, it's not that anymore. You're not supposed to say it. So you want to make intersex people a disability? You go right ahead, but you're still gonna end up using those pronouns, because if it's a disability, you must accommodate that disabled person if it doesn't cost you anything. Now, what's the non-brightwashed, non-regressive left middle ground we can find? What's the compromise that we can find on this issue instead of debates at U of T and talk radio segments and cable news segments, and it's all ratings, 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 but it doesn't help a single person? Well, it's this. A list of 30 different pronouns is completely impractical. It's just not practical. And there needs to be some understanding that there needs to be a level of standardization. A handful of acceptable pronouns. They and maybe two others are reasonable for someone to learn. But still, that's more than doubling the amount of options that people have to consider. Ideally, it would get down to one. We would find a way to agree on, like I said, the equivalent of the French en generally accepted third person singular pronoun that everybody understands what it means. We don't have that right now. And we're not going to get that if we keep fighting about whether we should try. And so we can meet in the middle. We can have the non-radical people on the side like me who are like, there's something to this. And I admit I don't entirely understand it, but there are parts of this that I cannot ignore. I can't explain away the fact that there are people who are just born, I don't like to say in the wrong bodies, but in a non-gender conforming body. And because I believe that everybody is born in the body that's right for them. If I didn't believe that, I would have had a breast reduction a long time ago. But these anti-pronoun change people have to pump the brakes some too, and accept that while your argument that the sheer plurality of options right now is excessive, the core concept that there's a missing piece in language right now is still sound. And none of that sounds like an unreasonable concession. I think we can do this if we just put down the verbal weapons and start figuring out what reasonable pieces we can take from both sides. There's also a legitimate element that people have expressed to me that they're afraid that they're going to get slapped with a human rights complaint just for making a mistake. And that I get it, because every so often there's this ridiculous case that gets through, and no matter what the laws are, someone is going to abuse them, but those cases are quite rare. The greater concern is that there are people being harmed right now by a lack of consideration. The statistics on trans suicides, on barriers to employment, all these things, they're shocking. They're horrible. And there is no moral argument to be made for allowing something we know is hurting people to continue because something else might hurt people. And there are ways of cutting down on, nuisance human rights complaints. It is something that we're still working on in Canada. The frustrating thing is, as soon as you have to mount a defense, it's a very expensive proposition. And that is something that can be corrected. And this is something that needs to be corrected for all aspects of human rights complaints. People shouldn't get bankrupted by an accusation. But this is a systemic fix that I think we need to do anyway. So let's add to the things we change, not hold back on progress because of the exceptions that prove the rule, that there are a lot more, legitimate human rights cases that get heard through these tribunals where there's no other place to really hear them. And then we can work on, fixing what's broken with the system as we go along. I'm a big believer in fixing what's broken, not throwing out the whole thing and starting again. When you throw out the whole thing and start again, it just means you make a whole new set of mistakes. At least you know what the mistakes are in an existing system and can fix them. So while I recognize that fear, I understand that this is a real concern in this age of the regressive left and rampant political correctness. It's not an excuse to knowingly uphold systems are causing harm to other people. And I'm saying this as someone who had my career mostly destroyed by the political correctness police. So I'm not speaking from a place that's not affected by this. I'm practicing what I preach here. I refuse to be as backward, afraid, and mean as these people who are out to destroy people based on ideological grounds. If I'm presented evidence that a group of people is hurting, I'm going to listen to that. And I'm going to try to help find a way to minimize that hurt. You can't take hurts away completely. Hurt is a part of life. But we can work to make the world better. And we can refuse to be a part of this ideological tit for tat. And yeah, you can giggle that I said tit. In just seeing who can wail about injustice the most without lifting a finger to correct any of these injustices. And yes, if you try, you're going to make mistakes. Plans aren't perfect from the outset, but we need to get past that petty tribalism and live in a world of solutions instead of a world of complaints. Now, why am I pushing back so hard on this one? Well, part of it is I'm a glutton for punishment, and I don't believe in sitting down and shutting up just because I say something unpopular. But also, I got an unusually high number of private thank yous to this video. Instead of leaving me a comment or sending me a tweet, people sent me direct messages thanking me for the video. And this tells me that something about the blowback to this video silenced people so they couldn't express their opinions publicly. And this tells me how flawed this whole free speech argument is, because people don't feel like they can speak freely on this issue unless they're part of a particular faction or two extremist factions. So just offering that up there in case anybody cares, in case anybody thinks that tactics do matter and not just targets, because I'm getting a little bit sick of this. I believe, and I've said this before, that it is best when every opinion we can possibly have is voiced and considered. Now, not everyone has the number of emotional lives to sacrifice. You know that code you put into Mario so you get 99 lives off the front? That's how I kind of consider my approach to social media. I and YouTube and stuff like that. I talk about this stuff because I have a lot more lives to burn than most people. Most people cannot handle the sheer vitriol that comes at them. It's not a weakness. It's the reality that they have jobs and they have employers and they're terrified that these people are going to target their places of work. And so I can speak because I already got fired, right? I already lost my livelihood. I already got blackballed. What have I got to lose now? Nothing. This culture war has taken from me what it's going to take. I don't have kids to threaten. You've already gone after my husband. You've already gone after my mother. I've already come through the other side of being afraid for my own physical well-being. You know, there's nothing left to take from me. So I'm going to continue to speak. So segueing into the next thing, because it is kind of related, you may have noticed there was no public video on Thursday. That video was Patreon only because I got to get the subscriptions up, and offering everything free and asking people out of the goodness of their hearts to try to subsidize content for everybody. It just isn't bringing in the numbers it needs to. So I'm experimenting with the monetization model. And so that means that I'm experimenting with Patreon specific content. Thursday videos are going to be Patreon only, in part because Ed the Sock is now doing a live show from the Hard Rock Cafe on Thursdays. So I have to pre-record Feedback Fridays now unless they're live. And I can't incorporate Thursday's videos into Feedback Friday anymore because they have to be recorded and I have to do them earlier. So now's a great time to become a patron. It's only $1 a month. That's it. That's all it requires to get that extra bit of content. It will not affect Mountain Monday. It will not affect Hot Toss Tuesday. It will not affect the interviews, and it will not affect Feedback Friday. Thursday has never had a theme. And I always said I was going to find a theme for it. This is the theme. So it is part, I need money. It's part that there is a reality because I can't make a go just on this. I have to take other work. I have to do other things. And so something has to give. And so I hope everybody understands. I would love to be able to just keep it free and open for everybody. I'd love to be able to turn ads off because then I wouldn't have to worry about YouTube flagging the ads, but it's not enough. And so I need to find another way to try to bring in a bit more money. If I can double the Patreon, I'm doing better. If I can triple it, then I'm laughing. Then I don't have to worry anymore. But that's not happening yet. So, until that crowdfunding thing comes in February, assuming that's successful, this is what I have to do. So hope you understand. And have a great weekend. And $1 a month, guys. $1 a month gives you 20% more Leanna K content every week. More red every week for $1 a month. Did I say $1 a day? $1 a month. Anyway, have a good weekend. Sorry for the shamelessness. Desperation does that. See you on Monday.